Welcome to the Minds of E-commerce podcast, where you'll learn one key strategy that made leading e-commerce companies grow exponentially. We cut the bullshit and keep the meat. In a 15-minute episode, founders and executives take us through a deep dive of a strategy so you get to learn and grow your online sales. In the last episode, you heard from Audrey Castonguay, who shared with us her rule of focus that allowed her e-commerce company, Wholesome Culture, to grow past $1 million in sales per month. And today, on episode number 4, Ahmed Zedan, co-founder of Haute Hijab, will share how they managed to scale fast using data to make better web design decisions, how they use customer insights to drive their A/B testing program, and how they've built a culture of experimentation within the company. I'm your host, Raphael Paulin-Daigle, and I'm the founder of SplitBase, a conversion optimization agency for lifestyle and fashion e-commerce brands. And a quick disclaimer, Haute Hijab is a client of SplitBase for conversion optimization services. Now get ready. This is Minds of E-commerce. All right, Ahmed, welcome to the Minds of E-commerce podcast. Thanks for being on the show.
Of course, happy to be here.
Yeah. So as you know, this podcast is really all about diving deep into a strategy that was key for the growth of your business. So you've been running Haute Hijab now for how many years?
We started in 2010.
2010. So, pretty recent company. I mean, it's not like you've been running this for 20 years or anything like that. We're about 10 years in. And obviously you've been growing massively, especially if you look at the last couple of years, if I'm correct, right? So now we've talked a bit about how you've grown. Yeah, we've talked a bit about how you've grown the business and you've achieved massive success. So tell us a little more about some of the growth that you've had.
Yeah, so I can share with you some more recent numbers with the last previous quarter. We grew about 100% over the last quarter. We've been progressively just growing faster and faster, month over month and week over week. And I think that I would attribute that to kind of our methodology and how we approach and think about growth. I think that, we've done a pretty good job in terms of just applying some really good lessons that we've learned over years.
Amazing. You've really been a champion at applying the lean startup methodology and utilizing data to validate some design decisions, some decisions when it comes to your operations and processes. Usually the lean startup methodology, is something that we see a little more in the startup world, in the software space, at least. Now you're a fast growing e-commerce company. Tell us a little bit more about how you're applying this methodology and how this methodology specifically is really key to your success and growth with Haute Hijab.
Yeah, we're big fans and big advocates of the lean startup movement. I think that it also comes out of like the human-centered design. There's a lot of things like that. I think there's a lot of really nice synergy between these different frameworks. And for us, the way that we really like to think about it is that it really starts off with the customer, right? And really thinking very carefully about them, really empathizing with them and trying to solve problems that they have. So it's everything from looking at like where are the friction points in terms of like your shopping experience to, what are the things that, they don't have to put in a lot of effort into when they're having to deal with customer experience or, they want to process a return. So there's just a lot of things like that we think about very carefully. I was actually talking about this on a different podcast where one of the things I think that's counterintuitive to a lot of people is that, the returns process as an example, right? That people say like, oh yeah, from a business perspective, we should make it as difficult as possible for people to process a return because that will mean that, we actually protect our bottom line. But where in reality, the right sort of thinking is optimizing for long-term relationships and long-term value. And that, again, goes back to who the customer is and whether or not you value them as a customer, in which case then you are thinking, no, I want to make it as easy as possible because that also means that they know they can come back and shop with us and they'll have an easy and pleasant experience and they will love the brand more because of that. So for us, like emotional attachment to our customer is such an important and integral part to our growth.
Right. And it's absolutely about thinking a little more about the lifetime value of that customer and who that person is and their whole experience with your brand, you know, over multiple years than just that one transaction, correct?
Right. Absolutely. And that also, I think, is part of what's contributed to such a high repeat rate with our business. I mean, you know, over 70% of our customers will transact with us each month. And it's just incredible to see because, you know, again, it's a testament to that relationship that we built and why they love us so much.
That's amazing. 70% of customers coming back month over month. You've got 100% growth quarter over quarter. And you attribute this to, you know, a method that at the end of the day is really about caring about your customer, understanding data, and then making incremental tests and improvements, you know, to your processes, or in this case, your marketing and your website, to really grow the company. So I'd love to dive into an example of that methodology in action. So what's one way that you would say you've applied that methodology, you know, maybe for your website or for your marketing and
Sure.
you know, step by step?
Sure. So let's say something like a feature improvement. Typically where it comes from is usually either we've recognized that there's a friction point in the process and we say like, hey, let's dive a little bit deeper into this, and then we'll launch maybe a survey to ask customers about it. Oftentimes our customers are also quite vocal, so they'll put in feature requests. I don't know how common that is with other e-commerce startups, but for us, you know, our customers just really love the brand and they're always happy to volunteer that information. So we look into it, and obviously not everything that comes across our radar is something that we implement and say we have to do it. So rather what we do is that we first look at that signal, and then we try and validate it with data. You know, we look at the likes of Google Analytics. We also use something called Wicked Reports, just a few different things to kind of see whether or not there's any truth to the smoke in a sense. And then once we've have at least a hypothesis as to why this feature or this issue that they're running into is a problem, then we come to you and we say like, hey, let's come up with like a design variant and test it. And then we let it run and we see whether or not it's had a positive or negative impact on conversion. And then based on that, whether or not we have a winner when we go into the design process. And it's always been this incremental movement upwards with everything that we do. And that's just the website. I think that when it comes to marketing, for example, it's everything from what channels we try to, what assets we try in that channel to who are the audiences that we're trying to hit. I mean, Facebook is just a great example of that because their targeting capabilities are amazing. So we're able to, we've tested everything from like lookalike audiences to looking at, whether or not a segmented list off of our database actually have higher efficacy, and depending on like whether or not we're retargeting them or not. So all of these things are constantly being iterated and worked on so that, not only are we matching the right customer to the right product at the right time, but we're always trying to create the best experience for them in that moment. Because ultimately, like what we're trying to do it's not about the sale, believe it or not. It's really about like, are we surprising them? Are we making them happy when they're getting to experience a new product that they may not have seen before? Because it's such an important thing for us to create that emotional resonance, because ultimately that's what's going to stick with them, because otherwise it's a transactional relationship and they won't care about you and they will never come back. So yeah, that's how we think about it.
Absolutely. And that's so interesting. And I just want to add, because I think it is, it's such a great example. So when you're saying, you're really looking at the data, looking at what customers want, what they're having problems with, and you're looking to build a new homepage, what I think really sets you apart from some other brand is, instead of saying, hey, we know we've got problems on this product page, for example, instead of just going and doing a full redesign right away and launching it, which most companies will do. Right? At the end of the day, it's faster, and if there's something that, and they're, taking a bit of a leap, and instead of taking, 5-6 months, well, it might take, just a little bit of time. However, your approach is really about, let's try to understand, take the time to really understand the customer. So instead of just really acting based on one bit of data, you're really diving deep and you're doing those customer surveys. You're really talking with the customers. You're trying to understand them in so many ways. And then you're validating every little design decision that eventually will end up in a fully formed product page. I mean, it's like, we call this like evolutionary redesigns. And I mean, I've seen, your brand grow, and conversion rates have been going up every quarter as well as a result of this. So now I'd love to know, because there are so many brands that don't do this, right? That they'll want to launch something quickly. They want to solve a conversion problem super quickly. And they're just going to rush to something that might be a little faster, but in the end, may not have the same outcome. What would you say to them? Why is your approach, even though it requires maybe a little more patience, the right direction instead of going the other approach?
Right. Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that you have to have like a baseline of like a good, well laid out page and a nice, design, right? I think you need that as a baseline, right? If you have a broken page, or the layout is poor, or, the user's not able to find the call to action, like those are obvious things where like, I think that you don't need to do any testing to just like, you need to fix. Right. But I think that what a lot of e-commerce companies reach is a point where they have a pretty healthy design, but they don't know how they can continue improving their conversion rate. And I think like this is where the testing methodology kicks in, and it's so important, and it's such a healthy thing that, it's like good hygiene. Like to me, it's dumb if you're not doing it. Like it's such an obvious thing. And it feeds into how we think and how we deal with all of this within our company as well. Because like for us, it's not just us thinking about like, hey, we need to do testing for the website alone. We do this all the time. Like we're constantly like not only surveying our customers, but we're doing phone interviews. We're also doing in-person interviews. Like this is something where we really want to live and breathe the customer experience very, very deeply. So it translates throughout the entire experience. So having said that, I think that, when it comes to the iterating on the website itself, and we're making these changes, it's just such a, like I mentioned earlier, it's like just good hygiene. It's just something that you have to do.
So give us an example when you're saying you're surveying your customers, and obviously we share similar methodologies. And as I said in the intro, disclaimer, Haute Hijab is a client of my agency, SplitBase, for conversion optimization. But I know, even before we were together, you also did a lot of research, and it is really true to the DNA of your brand and how you operate. So give us like an example of, when do you generally reach out to your customers? What type of questions do you ask them? What do you try to learn from them? And what are the best practices for that?
The honest answer is everything. We want to know everything. We want to know like, how big is your family? What's your household income? Like the demographic, psychographic aspect of the questions, but it's also asking things about, what's something that's aspirational that you wish that you had that you feel is missing? What's something that, trying to think of other examples that, we're always just thinking about like creative ways where we can suss out an insight that is not obvious to that customer, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. And we're trying to basically get into their head to understand a little bit more about like why they're making the choices that they're making, and why they live the way that they do, and why, it's just such an important thing to understand choice, right? And if you don't understand like the motivation and what's driving this person, then it's going to be very difficult for you to try and serve them. And ultimately, like, that's what we're in the business of. We're trying to serve this customer.
Right. I think that is super interesting, especially that question you mentioned, like, what are your aspirations or your dreams or things like that. Do you have an example of how you've used some of these more, intriguing, serious questions in your marketing, or how you've used that to just inform your actions?
Yeah, I mean, like when we've had these sort of things, I mean, it's a question that's kind of almost a, it's like a blank question, right? Like you really are asking for the moon, and you just want to understand like how this person's thinking and what's motivating them. And sometimes like they will give you an amazing insight. So we've had instances where we've had customers essentially like give us word for word how we should be describing our brand, right? Because like they said things like, it's really been life-changing for me. Before I met you or I found you guys, I felt disempowered. And I feel as a result of you, I felt empowered. So, there's instances of that. There are instances where it's inspired new products. There are instances where it's inspired like new services. So like there are all these different things that come out, and it's always unexpected and fun and new. And that's, again, part of why we've been successful is that we've really built this brand around this customer and really thinking very deeply, very thoroughly about her, and letting her drive the innovation, right? I think that there's one thing where you say like the customer doesn't know what she wants, right? Which there is that to a certain degree, but there's also that like there are the nuggets of insights and interesting things that you can suss out that then you can say like, oh, that's really interesting. We can build something around this. So that's, I think, where I feel like a lot of people miss out on some really amazing insights. Yeah.
Amazing. Are there like any sort of tools that maybe some people don't know about that you're using to really get some cool insights? Because I know you're really deep into research as well. So
yeah, so we've been talking as a team about this for a while. Right now, we use Asana for project management. I think it's been fine so far to be able to organize our research there. There are a couple of tools that we're considering, but nothing that's worth mentioning just because we haven't tested it ourselves, and we're big on like endorsing things. So if we endorse something, we put our name behind it. But yeah, I mean, like I think there's a lot of really interesting tools out there that I think the bottom line, what it comes down to is that it's about applying the scientific method. Yep. And if you find a tool that helps you apply that more effectively, and you can have thorough notes that you can go back and refer to, and then you see like, how did this impact the metric? I think that's a tool that's worth investing time and effort into, because, you know, a lot of what, you know, these systems and the companies are trying to do is just help kind of give you something that right out of the box allows you to quickly plug into, hey, this is a scientific methodology that just allows you to actually move and iterate really quickly.
Awesome. Good piece of advice. And now I think one of the most important questions out of this, because I know that one of the challenges that I see a lot of e-commerce companies when they're reaching like past $1 million and a little more, you know, sometimes a lot of them have been used to just implementing things right away, right? They've been trying like, oh, you know, implement, break things, you know, and just let's do it. But as they grow, they're starting to realize, you know, when you're starting to reach past $1 million, that it's like, hey, you can't really do that anymore. Like, it's starting to be really risky. You need to, you know, have a system in place, just, you know, like the one that you've explained, right? Data, research, understanding customers, coming up with a hypothesis, and then, you know, then testing and then evaluating those tests based on pre-established KPIs. But, you know, if there's a company who's in that transition right now, right? They're now in a few $1 million in revenue. They're used at implementing things real fast. What would be your biggest piece of advice for them as they're trying to transition into a more data-driven validation type of approach?
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if there are many companies that are able to reach $1 million threshold without having some level of being data driven, right? I think that it's really just about, okay, recognizing that you need to amplify that and that you need to invest in that more, because that's what's actually giving you that outsized return, because it's just really difficult to get there. And once you're there, I mean, like we fall and trap into that. I mean, like we have made changes where we thought like, okay, it would improve our conversion rate, but it hurt it in other places. Again, before we started doing this in a more iterative, methodical approach, and it hurt us. But you know, once you do that once and you realize the mistake, like it's hard to not immediately recognize that there's a problem with how you're approaching the problem, and that you just need to do a mind shift there and just do it the right way. And again, like you're either lucky that you got to $1 million that without being data driven, or you're about to go out of business now that you've gotten to $1 million and you're not following this approach, because it just means that you're not getting enough insights to be able to continue driving growth, because you're either going to stagnate or you're going to have to shut down.
Right. So final question for you, and kind of on the same note. Now let's say, okay, this company, you know, they're really implementing and starting to follow that approach of validating and testing everything, and being more data driven than they were, you know, earlier in the founding days of the company. What are some of the biggest mistakes to avoid as they're transitioning into this this new strategy or this new philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also an assumption that somehow when you start applying methodologies, you have to go from like 0 to 100. That like now you have to be like this amazingly strict, like I'm going to follow everything by the book kind of thing. Whereas I think that, you know, frameworks and methodologies, like the whole point of them is that they're meant to be guideposts. They're not meant to be like these very rigid structures that you have to live and work within. And I think that sometimes companies try and overdo it, where it ends up kind of, strangling any kind of like innovation or change. So now, like, where it took you maybe like a week to make a feature update or a change to the site, now it takes you like a month or two, and it's really slowing you down a lot. And I think that it's all about healthy balances. It's just finding a way where you're not to one extreme where you're so methodical and you're so rigid in how you do things that you don't make changes anymore, versus you kind of like changing things all the time and not having any structure whatsoever. It's all about finding that happy balance. And I think that, it's even when you're applying a methodology or framework, it's also being iterative about what you apply. Yep. So I think that it applies to everything. You have to see what's working, keep doing more of that, and stop doing the things that are not working. It seems like it's an obvious thing, but that's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really about, and just to kind of summarize it quickly for people listening, at the end of the day, it's just about really being aware of everything happening. And I think the biggest challenge is letting our egos down, right? What we want to win, what we want to work, what we think will work. Sometimes, I know like entrepreneurs were hungry for speed, but sometimes that's the problem. It's best to actually follow a process. And that's why we've got methodologies. It's about doing things right, so you don't have to do it 20 times. And the way you're applying the scientific method at the end of the day is really just about doing the right things. It's a process of understanding, it's a process of testing, and then making a decision. And at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. Of course, not so easily applied, especially not overnight. It is a whole mindset to cultivate, I think, within a company. But obviously very valuable as you've been growing, as we said earlier, 100% quarter over quarter, which is fantastic. I'm realizing there's one key question that I cannot end the podcast without asking you. If you were, let's say we're going a little more generic over the life of the company, right? If you were to start that company over again, what would you do differently in your later stages of growth?
Mm-hmm. At our later stages of growth?
Yeah.
So in other words, what would we be doing differently than what we're doing now?
Not later, but let's say like, if you look back, when you start really getting traction and you realize, like we've learned a lot from this, maybe we should have done things differently back then. Right. So I would say like when you guys really started growing fast, are there things that you would have done differently?
So I think like the thing that probably I wish we had done sooner is probably hiring engineering resources in-house sooner. I think that especially when it comes to engineering, when it comes to data science, I think these hires are better in terms of investing in them earlier rather than later, because it takes them a while to really understand like the culture, the brand, what you're doing, and plugging them into a process and having other people know how to work with these resources, because they're usually highly technical, and you want to kind of enmesh them into kind of what the team is all about. So that's something that I would say that I would change. But I'm also a big believer in kind of learning from the mistakes that you've done, and at the same time that the mistakes that you did do, you had to go through them because you learned a lot from it. And I think that there's a lot of things that we've gone through. And I think to also piggyback off of something that you just said earlier was just that I love being proven wrong. I love it when I learn from a mistake and say like, oh, okay, cool. So that's not what the customer wants. She wants this. I think that's really interesting because I'm learning something new. And for me, it's just really important that I'm always learning something and that I'm getting something out of it. So I think that's really cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. This has been so valuable and so full of gold. Lots of great methodologies, and I am sure that companies listening will be able to have lots of takeaways. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. Ahmed, now if people want to learn more about the company or about you and follow your growth and progress, where should they go?
Just hotehijab.com. We also have a blog. I haven't been blogging in a long time, but I have plans to. So hopefully, like some of the things I share can be insightful. But yeah, that's how they can learn about the brand.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Raphael.
All right. That's it for today's episode. In the next episode, you'll hear from Nick Sharma, former director of direct-to-consumer e-commerce at Hint Water and VaynerMedia. And you'll learn step by step an online ad strategy that helped Hint Water become a $100 million business. To make sure you don't miss any of the new episodes, subscribe to the podcast. And if you've liked what you've heard, make sure to leave a review in the iTunes store. That would truly mean the world to me. Now, if you're working on an e-commerce store that does over $1 million in online sales and increasing conversions is currently a priority, make sure to go to splitbase.com/assessment. That's splitbase.com/assessment to get a free analysis of your website and find out what's the number one action item our conversion experts recommend that you do next to boost conversions. If you have any guest requests, questions, or comments, tweet me at rpaulindaigle, that's RPAULINDAIGLE, and I'll be happy to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. This is Minds of E-commerce.